So what does it really take to build a civilization? You know, in the next few minutes, we're going to take a lightning-fast tour through the whole story, how we went from scattered tribes of hunter-gatherers to these huge, sprawling empires that literally shaped the world we live in today. Let's dive right in. And that's really the big question, isn't it? How on earth did we go from small, nomadic groups to building massive cities, inventing laws, and creating empires? It's an incredible story of human genius and invention for sure, but as you're about to see, it's also a story of some pretty surprising trade-offs. All right, here's our game plan. We'll start with the agricultural spark that kicked everything off. Then we'll look at the blueprint societies needed just to create some order. After that, we'll get into the wild experiments in building empires, see how they all got connected across the globe, and finally, we'll look at what happens when these massive structures start to fall apart. So where does our story begin? Well, like a lot of stories about civilization, this one starts in Mesopotamia. Around 4000 BCE, this revolutionary idea started to take root, and it would change absolutely everything about being human. You really can't overstate how huge this was. For the first time ever, people weren't just chasing their food anymore. In places like the city of Uruk, they could actually grow a surplus of it. And because of that one single change, people could stay in one place. Uruk just exploded, becoming this metropolis with over 50,000 people. I mean, a scale like that was totally unimaginable just a few generations before. But here's the catch. This progress came with a pretty serious cost. This new lifestyle, all that hard farm labor and a diet heavy on grains, it had an immediate impact on our bodies. The average height for men actually shrank by 6 inches. We basically went from being these super athletes, always on the move, to smaller farmers tied to the land. It's just a fascinating reminder that progress isn't always a simple straight line up. So you've got tens of thousands of people living side by side for the very first time. The next giant problem is, how do you keep it all from just descending into total chaos? Humanity basically needed to invent a whole new operating system for society. And one of the first big solutions came from the Babylonian king, Hammurabi. His famous legal code introduced a pretty radical new idea, and it's summed up perfectly in this law: an eye for an eye. Suddenly, for the first time, there were clear, written consequences for your actions. But Hammurabi's code was about more than just punishment. It established this world-changing idea of the rule of law. Now, it wasn't perfect equality. A nobleman's eye was worth way more than a commoner, but it was still a huge leap forward. Society was now governed by a set of written rules, not just by whatever a powerful ruler felt like that day. Meanwhile, over in ancient Egypt, a totally different kind of order was taking shape, a super rigid social hierarchy. You had the peasants and slaves at the very bottom, and their labor powered the whole empire. Every single level existed only to serve the level above it, all the way up to the pharaoh, who was seen as an actual god on earth. The entire society was basically a machine built to serve one person at the very top. Okay, so once societies figured out the basics of organizing themselves, the next big question was, how do you grow? How do you scale up? This led to some incredible experiments in political philosophy as civilizations try to find the best way to govern these huge, diverse territories. And in ancient Greece, you had these two completely opposite visions for society emerge. Athens tried out this radical, you might even say chaotic, form of democracy where key government positions were filled by a random lottery. The philosopher Plato thought this was absolute madness. He argued that running a state is a skill, just like sailing a ship, and you should leave it to an expert, a philosopher king, who could rule using pure logic and reason. It's a debate we're literally still having today: rule by the people or rule by the experts. Then, way over in Zhou, China, they developed a third model. Here, power didn't come from the people or from some genius intellect. It came from a divine blessing called the mandate of heaven. And what that meant was that a ruler's power was never absolute or permanent. If an emperor became corrupt or incompetent, heaven would show its displeasure with things like floods or famines, giving the people the right to overthrow that dynasty. So as these empires got bigger and bigger, they inevitably started bumping into each other, and this led to some of the biggest wars the world had ever seen. But it also led to something brand new: international diplomacy and trade on a truly global scale. Yeah, just look at the Egyptians and the Hittites. After fighting each other to a complete and bloody standstill at the Battle of Kadesh, both empires realized that more war was pointless. So in 1258 BCE, they signed the world's first known international peace treaty. They even started sharing knowledge. The Hittites taught the Egyptians how to work with metal, and the Egyptians shared their farming know-how. They figured out that peace could actually be way more profitable than war. Of course, connections weren't always so peaceful. Conquest also created a new kind of shared world. Alexander the Great's military campaign was brutal, no doubt about it, but it also stitched together this massive territory from Greece all the way to India, creating a kind of blended Hellenistic culture that spread Greek language, art, and philosophy everywhere. And then there was trade. The Silk Road was basically the internet of the ancient world, a massive network that connected the great empires of Rome, Parthia, and Han China. And it wasn't just fancy goods like silk traveling along these routes. It was revolutionary technologies, new philosophies, and entire religions, connecting humanity in a way that had never happened before. But, as history shows us time and time again, no empire lasts forever. The very things that make them so powerful, their size, their complexity, their interconnectedness, eventually become their biggest weaknesses. And to really understand this cycle, there's no better case study than Rome. Yeah. The fall of Rome wasn't a single event. It was more like a long, slow collapse caused by a perfect storm of problems. The decision to split the empire in two was a fatal blow to the West. The constant pressure on its borders drained the military and the treasury. And on top of all that, a whole series of weak and unstable leaders meant nobody had the vision to fix things. Until finally, in 476 AD, the last emperor was just sort of quietly removed from power. But here's the crucial thing. The collapse of an empire isn't an end. It's more of a transformation. The physical Roman Empire was gone, yes, but its most powerful ideas lived on. Its legal codes became the bedrock for modern European law, and its language, Latin, slowly evolved into all the Romance languages we speak today. And that really leaves us with one last, powerful question. We've watched empires rise and fall, built on farming and laws and faith. We've seen them connect through brutal wars and bustling trade. But their ideas about justice, about government, about how we live together, those continue to shape our world today. And it really makes you wonder, what are the truly immortal ideas